Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series by PharmaVOICE. This episode was made possible by a sponsorship from Micromass. For more information on Micromass, please visit micromass.com. In this episode, Taryn Grome, editor-in-chief of PharmaVOICE magazine, meets with Jessica Rousset, Chief Operating Officer, Cure Pharmaceutical.
Jessica, welcome to the PharmaVOICE WOW podcast program.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. You have a really interesting resume. I'd love for you to talk about your career path from a technology development officer to a lead technology role at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and now as Chief Operations Officer at Cure Pharmaceutical Corp. What has it been like for you over your career?
Great question to get us started. And I didn't predict my path when I was fresh out of engineering school. And I'll start by sharing an anecdote. I was a young graduate right out of engineering school, and I had my first job at GlaxoSmithKline Biologicals right outside of Brussels, where their vaccine operation is. And I was working in the lab, working on a cancer vaccine. And the human resources department at GlaxoSmithKline was really very powerful, and certainly understandably, I have a greater appreciation for that now in terms of looking at human capital and how precious it is. In any case, they put me through a number of psychological tests, and this was sort of the first aha moment I had when they came back and told me that really they didn't see me as a sort of a career scientist, but rather in marketing. And that was sort of the first jolt that I had and frankly, I was a little bit insulted by that, but it made me think, wow, okay, maybe my best laid plans are not going to be what I think, and not come exactly to fruition the way I had envisioned, but. I was very fortunate actually at Glaxo because I started in the lab and they gave me, put me on rotating positions. So I was involved in international clinical trial monitoring and in corporate strategy. And sort of what emerged from that early experience was that I was quite comfortable crossing disciplines and being sort of in positions where there was a convergence of disciplines. So while there was great opportunity for me there, I do have dual citizenship. I'm French-American and really wanted to, see what adventures might lay ahead in the United States. So I set sail to California and joined the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, and it was quite eye-opening actually because it's such a different organization, small academic institution with a very different culture and very different sort of power dynamics with researchers bringing in grant dollars and they have the power, right? So it was just a really big shift for me, but from in terms of experience, I really started to dive into sort of understanding early discoveries and bench science and sort of using your creativity and imagination to really understand what kind of products and commercial embodiments could come of this early work and learning how to protect the intellectual property and package the data and the IP to really achieve that goal, which is to deliver valuable and meaningful improvements to society as a whole. But again, this was sort of the same theme was kind of emerging as I was very comfortable in this convergence of disciplines, where I had to learn to speak and understand the science, be comfortable sort of with the law, whether it's IP law or contract law, and of course understanding business opportunities and how to structure deals and negotiate deals. So again, that sort of same theme emerged. And then after 5 years of being at Scripps, I did feel that I had sort of reached my plateau of learning, and I set my eyes on an opportunity to really take everything that I had learned there. And I will say that, it's important to recognize that, no place is perfect, and really learning what works and what doesn't work is just as valuable. But taking, all of those experiences, good and bad, and to build my own operation. And so I joined Children's of LA I think I was, just before turning 30 to really start a tech transfer operation from the ground up. And that's where I spent, the biggest chunk of my career so far. I stayed there for 10 years, growing the role from sort of a one-person tech transfer office to an innovation center, and reinventing my role several times throughout those 10 years, and ultimately putting CHLA on the map as a leader in pediatric innovation. And, that's really a legacy that I cherish. And then I made the move to Cure, a couple of years ago. Again, a very different environment, early stage, small pharma company, primarily because I was a believer in the technology. And we may get into this a little bit. Cure has a proprietary platform technology to improve the delivery of medications, and its core technology is this oral thin film that allows for precise dosing of medications without using, without swallowing, without water, and taste masking. So lots of really attractive features to deliver medications to children. And in fact, at CHLA, we had several ongoing collaborations to get this technology implemented and to deliver drugs to pediatric patients. But I'd say most importantly, I was inspired by the CEO of Cure, and I sort of immediately felt that we shared a vision, a philosophy, and a set of values, and ultimately that's what drove my decision, and that's where I am today.
Fascinating. So starting off in the bench and now ending up in basically a technology company. A perfect example of where you start isn't necessarily where you're going to end up, right? As
Very
you said.
True.
And it's having the foresight and the courage to take some risks and being agile with your career.
Mm-hmm.
So kudos to you. I want to talk just a little bit more about your time at Children's Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
You led one of the innovation technology solutions for pediatric patients. Talk to me about what that was like, because that's just such a special cohort of patients
mm-hmm.
when you're dealing
mm-hmm.
with kids. So talk to me a little bit about that experience.
Sure. So, thinking back on my tenure at Children's, it was both incredibly challenging and incredibly rewarding at the same time. So on the one hand, I worked with innovators, clinicians, and entrepreneurs to help them bring new solutions to clinic and market for pediatric patients, right? The challenge there was not so much to identify the unmet needs, because there were plenty, and there were a lot of, great technologists, so finding good solutions was also not the challenge. But it was really, what the challenge was to identify and define business models where a return on investment could be made. So we had to generate data sets or understand the data behind that really didn't exist. So, for example, understanding the health economic implications of standards of care, right, or status quo, and then understanding the cost effectiveness of a proposed intervention. And in these very niche, diseases and patient populations, a lot of that data just didn't exist. And it also meant educating investors about some unique regulatory pathways for rare conditions, whether it's on the drug side or the device side, and, convincing them of the viability, for example, of reimbursement strategies when, markets are very small, and so, payment and reimbursement becomes really critical to the survival of a new venture. So we really had to work against many unproven business models. And to your point, sort of combating the fear of working with vulnerable patient populations, but that really did need better solutions. So that was sort of one set of challenges in working in this space and trying to bring new solutions to market. But on the other hand, and this is not necessarily specific to pediatrics, but I had to work with hospital administrators and physicians to adopt new technologies or interventions, and usually with limited to no budget. So my operation was funded by the hospital, and then in part with grants. But it was on a shoestring, really. And so I'm sure if any of your listeners work in large organizations, and particularly academic medical centers, aligning all these different stakeholders to do something very new and related to patient care is moving a mountain. But And I would say that healthcare innovation in large organizations is really one of the most challenging things to take on. But when you're doing it on behalf of vulnerable populations that are just by and large overlooked by industry, right, and for whom solutions are not specifically developed, solutions are adapted to kids, it really makes the fight, worth fighting. And if I look back, my greatest fulfillment, even if there, were incremental changes, but it was changing the culture, making people think about, the tools that they were using and the adequacy of those tools in terms of the healthcare providers, and then more broadly, just raising the awareness of the public around sort of the many needs and opportunities to help kids and improve their care. So it's very
That's
meaningful.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like really meaningful work and really fulfilling work. And I was giggling because, you're talking about it on a shoestring budget. So how much innovation happens because you have no money, right? So you have to be very creative and clever with solutions. True. So kudos to you. So now to current day, you've been at Cure for just over 2 years, as I recall. So what do you think has been the biggest impact you've had on the company so far? And then as a follow-up, what's your longer-term vision for the organization?
Yes. So I've been at Cure for a little over 2 years, and it's been an amazing ride. And first, I'd like to say that at Children's, I worked with lots of different innovators, right? Lots of different technologies, lots of different solutions. But at Cure, it was really coming to an organization and putting all of this and converging all of my skill sets on sort of one entity, one project, and what I see it as my baby, one baby. And, I want to also just sort of give credit to Cure's CEO for bringing me on really as a change agent. I was brought on to make significant changes with the company and put it on a path to growth. But what I appreciate in the approach was, I wasn't sort of given a mandate, a turnaround mandate with revenue goals within, a certain amount of time. I was left to really get a good sense of what the company was about and get to know the people and really understand, given a lot of latitude to figure out how I was going to change things. And the way I chose to change things was to sort of take a giant step back and think about the why. Why does this company exist? What are we doing? What connects us all here? And do that sort of deep introspective work of positioning ourselves, understanding our values, understanding our why, and aligning everyone around that. So we did a lot of exercises around, competitive positioning and setting our mission, et cetera. But I would say that if, having done that and setting that really important foundation was the best way to make those important changes. And we did. We changed a lot of the team. As I'm sure you can appreciate, a founding team of a company is not necessarily the right team to lead it into a growth phase. So we had to make some, pretty difficult decisions and a lot of, big radical change. But I think the way we were able to do that in, I think, a positive and constructive way was to take that step back and really redefine who we were and who we wanted to be as a company. So 2 years later, we have a great team, and I think we're sort of, now pivoting into a high growth phase with a unique culture, and that's something that's just extremely important to me, is to build a very mindful and unique culture. We have a platform technology. So for me, the sort of the long-term vision of the organization is let's unlock and deploy all the potential of this technology across many different industry verticals, because the technology can be applied in a lot of different ways. So my hope is that we can grow while maintaining this unique culture, and create offshoots of the company that will tackle all of the market opportunities that are ahead of us.
That's wonderful. You talked about the culture, so let's go a little bit into what sets Cure apart from some of the other companies that are out there.
great question. Obviously, we all believe the technology is unique, but other companies certainly do, what we do. What I've come to recognize, whether it's in recruiting, because as a young company, we don't necessarily have the same ability to, in terms of compensation. So how do you get people to join your cause, right? And how do you get them to share the vision and get the right type of people that will take a risk and that believe in what you're doing? And that is, the culture and the team that we've been building. I do believe when we talk to investors or potential partners, they feel what's special with the dynamics that we have among us. And it is a culture of openness and of holding each other accountable and being real with one another. And all of us knowing the why. We all know why we're doing what we're doing, and we're all rowing in the same direction. And I just think that it's incredibly energizing and it's infectious, and people do pick up on it. And I think it's what makes a difference between choosing, our technology versus another. It's who's behind it and who do we want to work with.
Excellent. And not to put you on the spot, but, there aren't a lot of women in technology. So do you really do you consider yourself to be a role model for other women who may want to, pursue a career in technology? I have some friends who are in that tech field, and they go to these conferences, and they always come back and say, Karen, you won't believe it. There was only 6 women in the entire audience. Do you feel that also?
I think that's certainly still a reality. It's one that now that I have more of a leadership role, in terms of where I am in my career, it's also a reality that I can change and I can affect, right? And I do take that very seriously and take that responsibility very seriously. One thing I'll share with you is, we are currently at Cure looking to expand our board, and we're looking to bring a lot of women on the board. We want that diversity, and certainly a lot of gender diversity within the leadership at the company.
Excellent. Well, good for you all. I think that is the way that it's going to change, right? How it's going to move the needle. So let's talk about what excites you about healthcare today, because obviously you could apply your talents anywhere, but you have chosen the healthcare field. So what is it about healthcare that attracted you? I mean, what is it about healthcare that really excites you?
Wow. Obviously, a big chunk of my career has been in healthcare innovation, so I just get excited by new things easily, and I've seen a lot of new discoveries and technologies, and ultimately, certainly what drives me and excites me about healthcare innovation is where we can have the biggest impact in terms of unmet needs, and of course, spending a lot of time, catering to the needs of children. Is extremely, animating, right, and motivating. But I'll say, and just thinking about this more so from where I stand right now with Cure and some of the work we're doing, and I don't know if this is a bit controversial, but I'm really fascinated by sort of the endocannabinoid system and looking at sort of cannabis overall as a new area for medicine. Just the understanding the physiology of the endocannabinoid system is still pretty much in its infancy. So it just opens so many, so much potential down the road for targeting different diseases in new ways. And I think that's sort of an overarching theme that's been really intriguing me. And I'll talk a little bit about just controlled substances in general. I've been fascinated by some studies and advances looking at, usually like Schedule I controlled substances that are really being looked at to address some intractable diseases, particularly with mental health. And I'll give you as examples, a recently approved drug, the drug ketamine, the product called Spravato to treat depression, in approaching it in a very novel way in terms of mechanism. There's also some really encouraging data, clinical data with MDMA to treat PTSD. You have molecules like ibogaine for addiction, psilocybin for depression. So I just feel that and perhaps this is the cannabis, the openness to cannabis that is also opening people's minds to looking at these controlled substances that are defined by the government as having no medical benefit, right? That's what a Schedule I drug is.
Right.
But being looked at in these, really areas that have where a lot of the current solutions have failed patients. So I've been just kind of keeping an eye on that and really very intrigued to see what kind of, advances will be available to patients as we study these kinds of drugs that have been sort of off limits for many, many years. So that's sort of one big area that I've had my eye on, and I'm just interested in, again, because, we are active in the pharmaceutical cannabinoid space. But I'll also tell you, and this is, less about what excites me, but I think what animates me, and certainly since, joining Cure, because Cure was founded on the promise of ensuring accessibility and affordability of medications, is looking at and contributing to the cost effectiveness of drugs and seeing the cost of drugs go down and become more available and accessible to patients. So that's another sort of area that in terms of innovation and business model innovation that I have my eye on, and at Cure we'd like to certainly move the needle on.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. We'll keep an eye on those things as well. And anything to bring down the cost of drugs is always a good thing.
Yeah.
You've had a career that has been punctuated by many memorable moments. Can you identify one wow moment of your career for us? Something that really you look back on and say, that was really a defining moment for me.
Yeah. Yes. So one moment or experience that I thought I would share was when I was at Children's LA, and I was on maternity leave with my second child, my daughter. And while I was on leave, I decided to write my first grant. And this was a grant to the FDA to fund a pediatric technology accelerator. It was my first grant, and it got funded. And that grant was sort of the birthing of a vision, right, that I had during this period of motherhood that I was experiencing for the second time. And I was and with this grant, it really was financial freedom. It was my ability to sort of reinvent my role as, a PI on a grant, and with funding that would allow me to do things that were sort of outside the box and outside what was, established for my role. So it expanded sort of my reach, but more importantly, it elevated the needs and opportunities in pediatric innovation. And in fact, that small grant now led to spurred two additional grants at two different sites for $13 million for pediatric innovation. So it was a defining moment of independence and freedom and reconnection with my entrepreneurial spirit, I would say. So it was defining, and was very much tied to creation, right? Having my second child and having this happen during that moment of creation. So that's what I wanted to share.
That's awesome. So let's move from that one success, which is pretty tremendous, to how you celebrate successes today. So how is it that you inspire your teams? How do you really revel in those milestones and, achieving those goals?
Yeah. I would say that I've been much more mindful about, leadership and inspiring and motivating since being at Cure, because that's been a big area of focus as we build the company. A lot of it is, how we communicate and how we act, and it's in the small things. We have monthly staff meetings. I always really center myself, because I think what's critical is when you deliver a message, it needs to ring genuine, right? It has to be real, and that is, generally connecting with my hopes, my fears, my excitement. But as a leader, also always staying positive, because we're the chief believers, and we have to stay positive, even if things can be challenging. So it's just being honest with myself and conveying messages in a vulnerable and honest and open way. I've also been very mindful to not own ideas and allow other ideas to override mine, and to show that that's okay. the more ideas, the better. And, there's no ownership of ideas. You should be willing to sort of take on someone else's idea and elevate it. And then of course appreciating people and I think also helping out in areas that wouldn't be expected. So that's a little bit more expected in a small company, where if I have to sit down with someone and do some data entry with them, I want to show that, I'm here to help no matter what. Nothing's above anyone, right? And we're all there to help each other out. So that's sort of my approach to hopefully inspire people, is to appreciate them, enable them, and, and be their biggest sort of champion. And not taking ownership of ideas. And then in terms of success, that's a really an interesting topic to reflect on for me. As I was thinking about success, for me, it's really about earning the opportunity to continue to learn and to create and to grow as an individual. And really, that's a huge privilege. It's a gift. And and if you keep having these opportunities to learn and create and grow, then, by all measures, that's success. That means you're succeeding. And I've had to, frankly, learn to pause and celebrate success, because I think by the sort of the definition that I gave you, or my definition of success, it's more of a continual process of growth and change. Right. But it is very important to take a pause, right, and to reflect on some successes, whether they're small or large. And I've been better at doing that, and it's been manifesting, for example, with just getting together with coworkers and just sort of reflecting on the journey, what we've learned, what was thrilling, what was nerve-wracking, and bonding around these chapters that we're experiencing together. And then, of course, taking time to thank people. I think, just sort of breaking bread and connecting in a special environment outside of sort of your daily environment before jumping into the next thing. And right, and that's not, when you're sort of that person that's, okay, next, that's not easy to do, but I found myself doing it and really recognizing the value in doing that. And then there's also just doing it for yourself, just treating yourself to some time off, treating yourself to doing nothing. That is, so important, and I've really only started really appreciating how important that is.
Exactly. That's that. Is it that 20 minutes you found in between the projects? Right? I'm kidding. It is hard. And, I talked to a lot of fantastic leaders, and the traits you just described are really at the top of when the collective of looking at collaboration and sitting back and rolling your sleeves up and being part of that team. Skills that weren't necessarily recognized 15 years ago as key leadership skills, but they are becoming far more important in today's ecosystem. So great for you. And finally, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self? If you knew back then something that would help you today, what would it be?
Hindsight, always 2020.
Yeah. That's why we have eyes in front of our head. I get it, but but no, that's a great question. And as I think about that, certainly. I think, and this I think has been with me always, is doing things, doing work that I feel is important and meaningful. So that's, I think, a given. You should do what you think is, do things that you think are important. But the advice I would give myself is making sure that your workplace values you, because if you don't feel valued, you should leave, and you shouldn't force something that doesn't fit or no longer fits. And it's not easy to have that clarity, strength and wisdom to recognize it and take action. And perhaps a younger self has to learn the lessons, right? Because it does come with age and wisdom, I believe, and having the strength to be able to choose where you go, to find a gig where you can be yourself, where you feel supported. Because, work is hard. We choose, these challenging, meaningful jobs, but they are difficult, and you need
to put all of your energy into the work that you love. And you need to, it's important to do that rather than dealing with politics of survival. And when you do that and you're in that kind of an environment, the sky truly becomes the limit. And it's very empowering.
That's great. Listen, I want to thank you so much for sharing some of your insights, your journey with us. It was great to get to know you a little bit better, and I look forward to what you have in store for the future. Thanks for being part of our WOW podcast program.
Thank you, Taryn. It's been great, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series. And thanks again to Micromass for sponsoring this program. For more information on Micromass, please visit micromass.com. We also encourage you to listen to additional episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2019 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks LLC.